Hey guys, it's Kyle here and welcome back to the channel. I'm back with this 2011 Chevy Malibu. It has about 153,000 miles on it. Not a crazy amount, but it's definitely getting up there. We actually replaced the rear shocks on the last video with the Monroe brand shocks, so today we're going to be changing out the struts. I'm also going to show you guys how we go about doing that and how to tell if you need to have your struts replaced or what some of the warning signs are. So to start, we're going to open up the hood also while the car is still on because I want to show you guys what that looks like. You're going to want to grab your beverage of choice in your emergency compartment. I don't even know if I'm going to be using power tools today. Now that I'm well hydrated, I'll move the camera around and show you guys one of the signs that you need to replace the struts in your car. If you guys watch the spring while I move the wheel a couple different directions, you're going to see it kind of binding and then it'll eventually give. With that, it will also make a kind of horrendous sound. We're going to start with getting our floor jack in position under the suspension on this front wheel, and we will get the car up high enough to put our jack stands under it next. Now that we lifted the car up enough to get the jack stand safely underneath it, we're going to slowly lower the floor jack until the car rests on the jack stand. Now that the car is on the jack stand entirely, and when we still have the floor jack underneath the suspension, now it's time to take the lug nuts off. Now it's time to take off the tire. A little bonus, after you take the tire off, now you have a nice chair. Now when you live in Minnesota, this is the fun part you get to experience. We're going to start to spray some of this PB Blaster on any of the bolts that we're going to have to disconnect. So I'm going to start with spraying this mount for the brake line. These two bolts that hold the upper control arm on. Also this sway bar link. You can also put some of the PB Blaster on these top nuts for the shock mount. Right here. There. There. So here we're going to start with taking off this nut for the brake line mount there. I had to kind of hammer that socket on. It's going to be a 10 millimeter. Again, if you don't live in Minnesota, you might not have to deal with all the corrosion, but I do here. Now, since I had to hammer this socket on here, there's a little trick that I'll show you guys in just a second to get the nut back off. So you want to be as careful as you can, that way you don't damage any of the threads, but if you can fit a screwdriver through the socket and get it onto the head of the nut, you can hold the socket and usually tap the nut out with a hammer. And make sure that you know where it went, because it will fly out. I like to spray PB Blaster on pretty much anything under these cars in Minnesota. We don't need Loctite. Rust is our Loctite. We try to prevent that. Speaking of Loctite, this bracket for the brake line does not want to come off. Be very careful because you do not want to break the brake lines, but we're going to lightly chisel the mount because we do need to get it disconnected from the strut. on this car, once you guys can get the Loctite out of the way, you can see that this stud here slides into that groove, and that's how it stays connected. It's kind of rusted to crap on this one, so I will just show you when we put it back together on the new one. Next, we're going to work on the nuts for the upper control arm here. These are going to be an 18mm socket. So this was put together with some good Loctite, so we're just going to use the impact. Perfect. And same thing to get the bottom one loose here. Now that these are off, we're going to pull this bracket off. Be careful with these wires. Everything's expensive under here. And then we're going to hand thread these nuts back on, just so that it's flush with the bolt. We're putting those on because we need to hammer these bolts out. That being said, this is a good time to make sure that your floor jack is still underneath the suspension, because if these bolts come out, there's not a whole lot that's really holding the suspension up at this point. So you want to make sure that your floor jack is still holding up the rest of the suspension. Now, as you see, these are not going to come out super easily. They are kind of tapered near the bolt head. They're designed that way to grip into these better. Now, once you get them hammered out the majority of the way, you can take the nut off. You're going to have to carefully still hit these out. Be very, very gentle. Before I take this last bolt out here the rest of the way, I'm going to undo this sway bar link at the top. I have the lower bolt in the upper control arm still hanging on, just to keep everything afloat for now. I have an 18mm wrench that I'm putting on this socket. I have a T40 on my Milwaukee Impact that I'm going to be inserting into the middle of the sway bar bolt. I already got this bolt broke loose with a ratchet, so now I'm able to use my Milwaukee electric ratchet, which makes it a lot easier. But I will let you guys know that this will put up a little bit of a fight, so don't be afraid to use plenty of that PB blaster. When you're doing this with a ratchet, everything is backwards. So if you're having your ratchet turned to the right as if you were tightening something, it's actually going to walk this bolt off, and then vice versa. Once that's out, again, keep the nut somewhere safe because we're reusing that. Pull the sway bar out and let that sit. And again, just make sure that the floor jack is supporting the suspension here. While this bottom bolt is still holding on, I'm going to go up top now and loosen the 3 bolts that are up top. And I'll show you guys what that looks like. So these bolts, 1, 2, 3, are 13mm. So you're going to need your socket for that. We are not touching this center bolt here. Do not touch that one. That is not a good one to touch. Now normally when these 3 nuts are loosened, the shock should fall out of this top mount here. However, we still have that bolt hanging on to the upper control arm. That way it won't fall until we're ready to catch it. A couple things. Before I undo this top nut, this bolt should hold this shock in still. Keep an eye on it. we do not want to let the shock hit this CV boot here, okay? This is bad if that gets torn open, and it's expensive. I let a little bit more pressure off of it by letting the jack down just a little bit. Make sure that you don't stretch any of these hoses if you're going to let the jack down. The shock is going to be heavy when you pull this bolt out, so be ready for that. So, like I said, hang on to this shock and guide it out and down. And pull it out just like that. Now pause. Before you walk off with it, remember how it is sitting in here. Again, we are not loosening this top nut. All right, guys, now to put the old strut in, we're going to do the opposite of how we got the old one out. So in through the top first. Once you can get it up high enough, bring the bottom down. Again, make sure that you don't hit that boot. Then you're going to line up these bolt holes with the bolts up top. Get some of those started. Also, before you go crazy with all of this, make sure that you have the right part numbers. For the driver's side, the part number ends in 200. It matters because these bolt holes only line up one way with the sway bar. Now, once you get the bolts started up top, you can take your 13mm socket and get those tightened. They don't need to be super tight, only about 18 foot-pounds of torque. Once those are tightened, we'll work on getting the upper control arm in. I put copper anti-seize on all of these bolts that I'm going to be putting back in because I want to be able to actually get this out again if I have to. Now once you get done putting the bolts for the control arm back in, you can work on putting the sway bar back together. Again, we're going to go with some copper anti-seize. Now we're going to grab our 18mm wrench for this sway bar link again. And remember, use the ratchet reverse from what you thought. So we're going to be loosening, going to the left to get this tight. Now that this is nice and tight, we'll work on getting the ABS sensor back on. Now that we have the bracket back on, and these have anti-seize all over them, now we're going to send them home. Don't go all the way in one go. Try and do them evenly to give the other one room to flex. Now that those are tight, now we're going to put this brake line connector back in. I put some anti-seize on that as well, just in case. And then we'll send this one home with a 10mm socket. All right, now it's a good idea to always double check your work. I generally either do from the bottom up or from the top down. All the nuts on the top of the strut tower are tight. Working our way down. The sway bar link is tight. The brake line mount is tight. The upper control arm bolts, awesome. And the mount for the ABS is also in good condition. Now it's just time to put the tire back on. Once you have these started by hand, you can get them snugged up with an impact. Again, it's a 19 millimeter. Now we're going to raise up the floor jack again, grab our jack stand out, and this side is done. Now that we grabbed the jack stand out from under the car, I'm just going to lay this thing down. Alright, now I'm going to get this car turned around and we'll start on the passenger side. Alright guys, you already watched me do this on the driver's side, so I'm not going to go as slow this time, and I'm just going to get it done. I might speed this up. We'll see what happens. Remember, when you're doing the sway bar, you need to go the opposite. So right now it looks like we're tightening. We're actually going to be loosening it. You just have to trust the process. Shockingly, this one is corroded just like the other one, so we'll have to tap this on. Alright, so we're going to do what you should not do, and we are going to use some chrome sockets on an impact, and we're going to be using an adapter to go from a 1/2 inch drive down to 3/8. And that's why you do not do that. Alright, so it's okay, actually, because first off, Craftsman has a good warranty. And second, we're going to do this the other way. So you'll need a locking pliers here, and you're going to squeeze down, and then you're going to get on there with your 18 millimeter socket. You know, and sometimes people think, like, Kyle, why do you show the mistakes and stuff like that? And it's literally just to show you guys, like, stuff will go wrong, especially when you're working on cars in Minnesota. And if you only have one way to fix your problem, then you should not even try. Like, you need to have several different ways to go about fixing the problem, because some of your plans will fail. So yeah, I'm going to show you guys when I mess up, and I'm also going to show you what to do next. So I'm going to let this PB blaster work on here, and hopefully it gets me the rest of the way off. I'm going to work on taking apart the rest of the parts here. Alright guys, so if you thought I was going to give up, you're wrong, because I need to get this thing moved. So I was able to find another T40 bit in my Craftsman toolbox, which I will be linking in the description, because I promise you, if you get it, you will not be upset. It is very convenient that it has multiple sets of tools for situations like this, where you broke one of them and you really, really need to do it again, but this time you need to be careful. It's also very nice that Craftsman has a lifetime warranty, so if you're worried about breaking stuff, like me, then it will come in very handy. And just like on the other side, I kept the bottom bolt in here for the upper control arm. I'm going to loosen the 3 bolts up top, and this shock should rest down nicely. Be careful for the boot again. I'll also be linking this Milwaukee ratchet. This thing is very, very nice. It's probably my favorite electric tool that I have. Just because it wants to play tough, I put one of the nuts back in on the top of the mount here. That way I can get this bottom bolt out. So I had to hammer the strut from the top in order to get it to break loose. But if you're going to do that, again, we want to watch out for this boot here. So make sure that when you're doing that, you leave one of the nuts on to a bolt up top. Now that we have our new strut, we're going to put this one in just like we did on the other side. And remember, this anti-seize is going on everything. All right, now it's time to put the tire back on. So guys, I'm honestly pretty shocked, no pun intended, but when we started, we were at about 27 3/4 of an inch. We were definitely not over 28 inches. And on both of the fronts now, we're at 28.5 inches on this passenger side. For some reason on the driver's side, we're at 28.25. So I don't know if that's normal, to be honest, but it could be a couple different things, I suppose, but I'm pretty shocked that it raised the car up this much. I don't know how it's going to affect the ride quality. I will say that it seems like this is a lot stiffer now. I don't know what that translates to going down the road, but it definitely doesn't have a lot of give in it, and maybe that's just part of the break-in process. But overall, the installation, minus the rusty parts, I can't complain about it. This kit had all that it needed. Craftsman Tools did awesome. Milwaukee Tools did awesome. If you guys did like the video, or if you learned something from it, please like, subscribe, all that cool stuff. If you're the kind of person that does a lot of this stuff on your own, like I said, hopefully this video gave you some ideas on how to go about it yourself for your own vehicle. Also, if you need some good tools with good warranties, I'm going to put some links in the description for the shocks, the struts, Craftsman Tools, Milwaukee Tools. sockets, all sorts of stuff. I can't really say that I'm upset. Tools will break when you put a 1/2 inch impact on them when they're a 1/4 inch drive. So yeah, that'll happen. Thank you guys for making it to the end of this video. I appreciate all the support, and I'll see you next time.